My first gig, wow. For a start, you know, I was painfully shy. Well, I felt that I didn't want a crowd to sit back and ignore me. So I'd go out and I'd jump on the tables and kick the drinks on the laps, and and people started then remembering who I was. Well, that was my first gig, but let's face it, everybody does have their own story.
We know him as an Australian music legend, but where did his story begin?
I remember sitting there in class where I just thought, oh, thank goodness I can stop sweating about all this stuff. I'm not going to need this. I'm going to be a musician. You know, the skies opened up and I just felt, it's like, duh, you know.
What experiences shaped the artist he would become?
This one person, Brent Eccles, who was the drummer in the Angels, he was the first person to actually put his money where his mouth was, and within I don't know how many months, we crossed the Nullarbor.
And is there a song that inspired his career? What's in a name? Everything and nothing, if you ask Mark Lizotte, or Diesel, as he's otherwise known. That epithet would bring Mark chart success, artistic recognition and accolades. As Diesel, he was awarded Australian Male Artist of the Year 3 times during the first half of the 90s. Though his stage name correlated little to the man it was imposed upon, it represented the extent by which his work, especially his mastery of guitar, had impressed our musical landscape. As Mark Lizotte, he was born to a large family in the US state of Massachusetts. His father, a jazz player, can be thanked for Mark's inherent zeal for music. It was also due to his father that the Lizotte family would emigrate permanently to Perth, but not before one initial move to Australia and several other relocations around the US.
You started playing cello, was it?
Yeah, I started on the cello. That was basically because we moved to this place in Arizona, and it was a weird little town on the outskirts of Phoenix. Weird, I say. It's kind of all farming areas and a lot of illegal immigrants all working there and stuff. And the guy that owned most of it, this one person, Mr. Knox, he built this beautiful school. It was probably to kind of, you know, the word on the street was he built the school to kind of keep the authorities sort of quiet, you know, so he could have all these illegal immigrants working in his farms. But nevertheless, they had this amazing school in this area that you wouldn't expect it, and an amazing music program, and they had cello. But I was a bit disappointed when I got my cello, and it was like square. It had no shoulders and no curvaceous parts at all. It was like a cigar. Actually, it's kind of cool now because it's like Bo Diddley's guitar.
It's a bit like that, yeah.
But I was very embarrassed to take it on the bus and stuff. It was like,
I don't think I've ever seen a square cello.
Well, it was a school model one.
Beginner's model.
Yeah, beginner's model. And it sounded like one of those Asian instruments that had no body. You know?
Yeah.
It was like really horrible. And so I battled with that. And then finally, when we moved back to Australia, my dad took me to this warehouse in Melbourne. We picked out a proper, cello with a shape. And that kept me pretty happy. But I guess when I say pretty happy, I really wanted a guitar all along. And by this stage, I'd already bounced from instrument to instrument. I picked up trombone and back in the, because it was bass clef, same music. The cello was like a bit of a pacifier, I suppose. And then finally, my brother and my sister, older, next to me, they pulled together and bought me like a $130 guitar when I was about 14. And
that's when you were living in Perth, though?
Yeah.
So what was the difference between the sort of musical influences of living and going to school in America? What you hearing on the radio and all that,
well,
different and what you heard here?
Yeah, I got a lot of different radio, and the radio was a big part of my whole, development. My first memories of the radio in America when I've got this. I can't remember what I did 2 days ago, but I remember, I've said things to my parents, and they can't believe that I can remember back to that far, and they're like, it's impossible. But I remember, hearing Otis Redding come on the radio. So when we moved to Australia, the first things I heard, one of the first records I remember moving into Albury was Eagle Rock, and I just thought it was an American record because it just sounded so, like Creedence Clearwater or something. And I didn't realise till years after that it was an Australian band. Yeah. But it mashed right in with all the rest of the stuff. And
was there anything else you were interested in, though?
Not really. No, music was pretty much it, and I just sort of coasted along, and until I got to the age of, I guess it was year 8. And I was sitting there and I just was like in a demountable classroom, and I was starting to get a bit naughty by this stage. And
So when did you leave school?
what I could see in front of me was year 11 and year 12 was just more algebra, more stuff that I'll never use ever in my life.
So when did you leave?
I left in, well, I say I left in year 10, but I actually I stopped going to school around year 9, which is terrible. You know, when people ask me, you know, what should I do? That's like, I would never, ever recommend that to anybody, just to have that completely. It's like, I sound like a parent now. It's
Now,
like,
yeah, see,
get
now
a
you
trade
get
as
kids.
well.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there was like, literally, it was like 1 month or 1 day where I can remember sitting there in class where I just thought, oh, thank goodness I can stop, you know, like, sweating about all this stuff. I'm not going to need this. I'm going to be a musician. And it was just like, you know, the skies opened up and I just, it's like, duh, you know. Yeah. And I just kept it to myself.
See,
it was my little secret.
I never even thought like that, you know. I sang all the time. I sang all the time and I joined bands. And even when I joined coaches, I was just sort of, oh, it's something to do. This is fun, you know. And then it was about 2 years later that I went, oh, God, this is serious. So it's pretty good that you got onto it that early.
With his cello long pawned off for cash and a guitar now practically grafted to his body, Mark Lizotte set about succeeding in music. As in much of Australia during the early 80s, the pub and club scene for bands was vital. However, it was divided into 2 distinct camps, those who played original songs for little cash and those who played covers, earning a lot. Mark's tenure on the Perth scene saw him on both sides of that musical divide, in the innocent bystanders, playing original work, and in the kind, playing covers. Whether he realised it at the time or not, both disciplines taught Mark the necessary skills he needed. From the moment he first stepped foot on stage, people remarked on Mark's ability as a musician relative to his age.
But I would always get the Sunday paper on a Saturday night and look through the, you know, the ads of see who
What's wanted a guitar player?
Who wanted anybody, yeah. You know, it was one of these early bands that I got hooked up into, and we met through the Sunday Times, and he came down and checked the thing out, and his name was Brett Keyser, and pretty amazing songwriter, singer, and he basically just hijacked the band. He saw the band and he kicked out the singer and this backing vocalist and took over. But through all that period...
this was an original band, though.
The original band called Innocent Bystanders.
But did you make any money? No.
Well, not really. We were pulling big crowds, and we were like the only original band. But,
so in the Bystanders, you were more just a guitar player?
Well, I was a guitar player. I used to sing a little bit, but, you know, I wasn't much of a singer then.
And was that your first recording experience?
Yeah, it was. My first recording experience was coming over to from Perth to Sydney, Trafalgar Studios with Peter Walker.
Same producer as coaches?
Yeah, well, that was, you know, something that was very impressive to us.
And he was a Perth guy, actually.
He was really good because he, you know, he just let us kind of be what we were, and, you know.
One of the earlier bands that you played, if not your first, was where you got paid, was probably a band called The Kind. Is that sort of...
It's hard to explain to people how big the cover scene was in Perth. It was beyond, you know...
So you were in one of those cover bands?
It was when things started tapering off a bit, and I'd been in this original band, and the band split up. Well, I got sacked for being too loud, or one of those...
Wouldn't be the first or last time.
No, I sacked myself now. And I think it only went for like 3 or 4 months, but ironically I made more money than... Yeah, I made more money in that period and paid off my tax bill than I'd made in like 4 years of playing, you know, originals before that.
All right, tell me what covers you were doing.
It was a bit of a mixed bag, actually. We kind of... Sort of some classic stuffs, not a lot of top 40, more sort of...
Play that funky music, whiteboard?
No, that sort of, no. Not covers 101.
Oh, right, okay, good.
It was more sort of like adventure stuff, like we did Face to Face from Pete Townsend's solo album, stuff like that, just pretty advanced.
Progressive covers band.
Almost, yeah. Of course, there had to be the obligatory, you know, the classic, sort of more classic rock stuff. Probably a couple of Chisel songs.
Yeah, come on, you can tell us, yeah. But, you know, I mean, even Chisel, we started out, basically, we had to do covers. And when you look back on it, I think the whole process of doing covers, actually, you see how the dynamics of a song works for the crowd, so it helps you when you're writing your own stuff.
Absolutely. I think it's a real... It's kind of like the dark side, going over and playing covers, and I would say the dark side, for a lot of musicians, I think they go over that way, and, you know, with the intentions of, like, I'll just do it for a little bit, then they get into the rut, then they never can do their own thing because, you know, one, they like the money. Yeah. Two, they sort of, like, get into that sort of, like, oh, I can't focus on my own stuff anymore because I'm just sort of, can't see the wood through the trees. But For me, it was great because I'd realised how undisciplined I'd been, you know, pretty much since I started playing music. I'd just been into my own devices and I'd never had to really sit down and analyse something and go, well, how are they doing this? And what is that chord? And, you know, how does this all work?
You know, let's face it, everybody has their own story.
I'd started to do a lot of in-stores because we'd started to do that with neighbours, obviously, as well. So Born to Try really started breaking before my character even came on set. So I remember walking out in Melbourne, in High Point, just kind of asking, are people there? You know, did some people, you know, are they there? And I walked out and I just remember seeing just thousands of people and just kind of sitting there going, firstly I thought, I'm going to be here for a while. And I was like 10 hours, 11 hours. And then I sat down and sang a couple songs and everybody was singing and it was just filled. It just felt it felt wild.
Mark Lizotte, Johnny Diesel, or just plain Diesel, has been a significant fixture in Australian rock for the past 20 years. Born in America but growing up in Western Australia, Mark quickly realised his life's vocation was in music. Earning his stripes playing in several bands on the Perth scene, it became apparent Mark was more than just your average guitarist. By 1986, bandmates he'd collected in two early bands, The Innocent Bystanders and The Kind, were joining Mark for what would become his most successful venture, Johnny Diesel and the Injectors. This band would see him as a frontman for the first time in his career, but also lead to a popular case of mistaken identity.
Was Johnny Diesel and the Injectors named after the bass player? His name John Dalzell, and you know, it was kind of a silly thing because I ended up with it. And yeah, well, we were actually a nameless band for I don't know how many months, but we just were like, you know, we're just playing Wednesday nights from 12 to whatever at, you know, the backstage bar. We don't need a name. Like, who cares, you know? Right. And then we started drawing, you know, a couple of bikers and a few dogs, and you know, the lady that was doing the promo for the room said, yeah, you know, what about a name? You guys got a name? I want to put a little ad in the paper, and that's where I thought I'd just do it as a joke to humour everyone in the band, you know, making fun of Johnny's name. And the rest is history, because I've still got people shouting Johnny at me across airport corridors now.
I know, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
20 years later. Yeah. But yeah, so that was kind of where we started, but we didn't, you know, make any money. It was just a way to play, and, you know,
But you weren't taken, that's when people were starting to listen to you seriously as a player.
Well, yeah, I mean, lots of managers would come to town, and that's kind of what happened in the end, was one particular person who saw us and said, you know, I'm going to go back to Sydney and I'm going to call you. And I went, yeah, right. I've already had, like, this guy, that guy in my house actually come over and to see where I lived and everything. Met with my dad, because at this stage I was so broke that I moved back in with my parents. And my dad would sort of, like, be pretty hard nut and say, yeah, well, what do you, you know, what's your business here? What do you want? You know, you're going to, like, manage my son? What's going on? And they'd be like, you know, listen, I have all the good intentions, Mr. Lizotte, blah, blah. And then, poof, they'd be out of town.
It's like he's a courting you.
Yeah, puff of smoke, you know.
Yeah. What's a long way to come back?
Well, it is. And that, the tyranny of distance with Perth was really at large back then. And so this one person, Brent Eccles, who was the drummer in the Angels, you know, after playing with The Kind, I made enough money to pay my bills. I shot off overseas, ended up broke. Somehow we managed to get the support, doing an Angels support up through Port Hedland and all up the northwest of Australia. So scrambled enough, borrowed some money to get back and did that tour, and that's where we met Brent, and I think he made a little mental note, you know, keep an eye on this band sort of thing. And he was the first person to actually put his money where his mouth was, and you know, within I don't know how many months, we crossed the Nullarbor with literally $100, you know, float money. Right. You know, and we went and did some demos at Rhino, and it was, you know, that was actually where I met you, was in that studio. Yeah. So things just, you know, we were obviously on the fast track, or some kind of track anyway, to somewhere, because we weren't going anywhere in Perth. So we got to Sydney and did 9 shows a week. That was, you know, kind of Brent's plan, was just to get us over and just do as many gigs as we possibly could. And, you know, I guess the good thing was meeting yourself and, you know, you asked us to come on the road and do this.
Well, I actually tried to pinch you.
Yeah, well, you know.
Let's be fair here. You know, I did try and steal you as a guitar player straight away. Now, did you sing out of necessity, or was it
out of necessity? Pretty much. I mean, everyone just said, "Hey, you're writing the songs, you sing them." You know,
right.
It was like it was one of those sort of things. And at first, you know, like the first record, I can still hear, you know, a voice that's sort of struggling to find itself. You know,
I can still hear it on my last record.
Well, I mean, people, you know, said to me a lot of, you know, after I made the first solo album, it's like, what happened? Did you take singing lessons or something? And I'm like, no, I just stopped touring, you know? Yeah. And I started running, you know, like, and my lungs, you know, opened up. And then when I went to sing again, it was like, oh, there's my voice. I remember wanting just that bit more range up top, that clean range, you know, they could get, and I just couldn't go there because I just was just like flogged, you know? Yeah. So a couple of months off and my voice just changed radically. And then once you've got it, you just want to keep it.
And you can also find it.
Yeah, you can find it, exactly. So you know what it's like. It's all mental, actually, really, when it comes down to it.
We're mental to be doing this.
Yeah, exactly. And then Who Turns Up? You know, In Excess, Midnight Oil. I think you were at that first gig. I think it was said in one of the street magazines that if a bomb went off in the Middle Harbour, pretty much most of the, you know, Australian music industry would have been taken out that night. So. I'm in love with you.
Diesel had an epiphany sitting at his desk in school. Why would you need algebra and geometry if you were born to be a musician? Call it luck, call it destiny, or call it damn hard work, Diesel realised his dream. Starting out in Perth under his real name, Mark Rizot, he slogged it out in the pubs and clubs, eventually being noticed by the Angels drummer, Brent Eccles, at a notorious Perth venue. Mark was soon shepherded to Sydney and found wide success in Johnny Diesel and the Injectors, a band that imposed upon him forever the name Diesel.
So is there any one gig that really stands out as a turning point for the Injectors?
I guess the next big pivotal moment for us was when we first came to Sydney and we did this gig at the Middle Harbour Skiff Club. And it was the tiniest of place, and you know the pool table took up most of the room in the main
Could be
area.
the stage.
Yeah, well, basically it was. And it had this, you know, dinosaur PA in there that just distorted like there's no tomorrow. You know, I was just like, wow, you know, gobsmacked at first, you know, the beauty of Sydney and that whole harbour and the whole thing, and I just felt like, wow, I've been transported to somewhere on the Riviera or something. It was like science fiction for me. It was like, we're going to do a gig here tonight, and then Who Turns Up? You know, In Excess, Midnight Oil. I think you were at that first gig, or if not the first one, the second one.
The second one, Jane went the first one.
So it was like, you know, we only had 20 people, but it was like pretty much, you know, I think it was said in one of the street magazines that if a bomb went off in the Middle Harbour, pretty much most of the, you know, Australian music industry would have been taken out that night. So
yeah. But it's funny you said, you know, because I remember when Cold Chisel first drove into Sydney and driving up Parramatta Road in towards the city, it was like suddenly, it's like being in New York. You know,
yeah, oh, it is.
So, you know, we come from these country
towns.
Well, it
is. Sydney is an amazing place for a band, you know, that just arriving like that, for anyone just arriving, because it's so higgly-piggly, you can't get a grip on where it goes, where it ends, where, you know, coming from Perth and before that, all places that were flat, you know, Sydney just was really, really hard to get your head around.
So what was an early Injectors gig like? You know, what was the sort of the feel?
Rough.
Rough, yeah?
Yeah. A little bit rough. Well, like I said before, we didn't used to rehearse a lot, so we'd kind of work things out on stage to a large degree. You know, we get the idea of maybe doing a song, or I'd throw it at them, you know, that on the day, and we'd just sort of have a go at it that night. And I'd probably said more that if I was be lucky to say maybe one word all night at that on those days, pretty much stared at the pedals and maybe the microphone if I could get my eyes to that, but. Yeah, pretty shy, but, you know,
it's tough.
Sort of lost in the music. It is, when you're not sort of brought up into that mould, I think if you start out as a singer with a microphone and you're kind of forced to, like, connect with the audience, but being that I'd always had the guitar and to hide behind, it was like, yeah, well, I can do the singing and the guitar playing thing, but that whole frontman thing, that's
another thing
for someone else.
You've talked about the early influence. You've talked about ripping off songs from your dad's record collection.
You know, Jimmy Smith, Hoochie Coochie Man, Since I Fell, which came from a Jimmy Witherspoon record.
Right. One of those songs, you know, Since I Fell For You actually made it onto the first album, which is a testament to a great song, really.
Yeah, well, I haven't actually listened to it that much since the recording, you know, apart from the recording, I've never listened to any of my records that much. Just listening to it then, out in your kitchen, it was like, it sort of travelled pretty well.
Well, it's a great song.
Yeah, it is a great song, and I think that's why Terry Manning, the producer, you know, just said, oh, this has got to go on there because it's, you know, you guys do it. And I think there's been so many schmaltzy versions of it with lots of production and strings and very grandioso, and our version was ultimately opposite all of that.
Do you think it was stripped back then? This is as most stripped back as ever been, and you're stuck with me singing with you, all right?
Oh.
Give it a go.
Made me leave my happy home. Took my love and now you're gone. Since I fell for you.
Oh, love, yeah, brings such misery and pain. I guess I'll never be the same. Oh, baby, since I fell for you.
It's too bad. It's too sad. I'm in love with you.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
First you love me. Took my money and you saw me. What else can I do? And I'm still in love with you.
I guess I never see the light. I get the blues every night. Oh, baby, since I fell for you. Oh, baby. I said it's too bad. It's too sad. I'm in love with you.
I'm in love with you.
Well, first you say you love me. Take my money, then you snub it.
You snub me.
But what else can I
Can I
do?
do?
'Cause I'm so in love with you.
Oh, guess I'll never see the light. Get the blues most every night.
Oh, baby, since I fell for you.
Since I fell
For you. Mark's a guy that I've worked with a hell of a lot. You know, I know him like the back of my hand. He's one of my dear, dear friends. He's one of my favourite musicians in the world. He's a talented writer, singer, producer, probably one of the best guitar players I've ever heard. So it was good to get inside his head a bit, you know, musically, and then to perform with him. You know, I mean, I've done a million songs with Mark, and I haven't ever been disappointed with one of them. And I just thought, for the way he plays the blues, there's nobody else like it, and the way he sings the blues, it was just, you know, as usual, it was a complete pleasure.